Clerk.
Government Business, Order of the Day number 6, Social Services Legislation Amendment, Family Measures Bill 2015, consideration of Senate's amendment.
The Minister.
I move that the amendment be agreed to, and it is my understanding that this is non-controversial and it is delaying the commencement date, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The question is the amendments be agreed to. All those opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Clerk.
Government Business, Order of the Day number 1, Telecommunications Legislation Amendment, Access Regime and NBN Companies Bill 2015, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Blaxland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Telecommunications Legislation Amendment, Access Regime and NBN Companies Bill 2015. This bill's moniker, or its informal title, is Vertigan 1. It's the first of 2 bills that we understand the government will introduce to implement the recommendations of the Vertigan panel, which conducted a series of reviews of the NBN in 2014. Before I get into the detail of this bill, a bit of background on this Vertigan panel. Before the last election, Malcolm Turnbull, the now Prime Minister, made a lot of promises, and he's broken most of them. He promised that he would build his second-rate NBN for $29.5 billion. We now know that it will cost almost double that, up to $56 billion. He also promised that Australians would get access to the NBN by 2016, that all Australians would get access to this second-rate NBN this year. That has blown out now to the end of this decade, more than double the original timeframe. And he also promised that, if elected, he would get Infrastructure Australia to do a cost-benefit analysis of the NBN. In August of 2013, Mr Turnbull said, and I quote, "We are going to do a rigorous analysis. We will get Infrastructure Australia to do an independent cost-benefit analysis." Well, Deputy Speaker, he broke that promise as well. Instead of getting Infrastructure Australia to conduct this cost-benefit analysis, an organisation that the Prime Minister only a few weeks ago described as an independent statutory body with a board of recognised industry experts, Malcolm Turnbull instead appointed some old mates, some former advisers and some of the biggest and most outspoken critics of the NBN. It was not what he promised. It was not an independent review. It was a review by people who he knew had the same view about this project as him. This legislation that we are now debating is based on their work that has since been found to be hopelessly wrong and has been largely discredited. The Competitive Carriers Coalition, that represents much of the telecommunications industry, including Macquarie Telecom, NextGen and Vocus, said this when the Vertigan report was released. In a press release headed, "Vertigan recommendations should be binned." They said, "After deliberating all year, the Vertigan panel has recommended that Australia should emulate 1970s US telephone industry policy to promote investment in 21st century broadband networks. Most of the Vertigan recommendations represent nothing more than rehashed, discredited theoretical arguments promoted by opponents of regulatory reform and the NBN. The inquiry has been an expensive distraction that has done little more than create uncertainty and disquiet across the industry during a crucial period of the transition to a new broadband network." That was the Competitive Carriers Coalition. The Senate Select Committee on the NBN subjected the Vertigan panel's independent cross-benefit analysis, independent in inverted commas, to a rigorous scrutiny in early 2015. They identified a number of fatal shortcomings in the cost-benefit analysis. One of the best, Deputy Speaker, was the absurdly pessimistic forecast that by 2023 the median bandwidth required by Australian households would be 15 megabits per second. It was an absurd conclusion, According to NBNCo's own results, their latest results, 67% of homes connected to the NBN are already ordering higher speeds than that. This forecast was so absurd that even NBNCo Chief Executive Officer Bill Morrow criticised it when it came out. The Senate Select Committee concluded, and I quote, "The cost-benefit analysis is a deeply flawed and overtly political document. It is not credible and is not a reliable basis upon which to make decisions about the NBN." Well, since that report came out in March of last year, there has been even more evidence to prove that the Vertigan panel got it wrong. Because the Vertigan panel based its cost-benefit analysis on cost assumptions from another dodgy report written by the Prime Minister's mates, the 2013 Strategic Review. In August of last year, the cost assumptions in the Strategic Review were also proven to be hopelessly wrong. That's when we found out that the cost of building this second-rate version of the NBN was not going to be $41 billion, as assumed in the Strategic Review, but had blown out to up to $56 billion. And that is not the only cost assumption that the Strategic Review got wrong. Virtually all of its forecasts were wrong. It forecast that fibre to the node could be built for $600 a home. This cost has now nearly tripled to $1,600 a home. It also forecast that it would cost $55 million to patch up Telstra's old copper network to make the fibre to the node network operate. That cost has now blown out by more than 1,000%. It also forecast that 2.61 million homes would be connected to the NBN via HFC, via pay TV cables, by December of this year. 2.61 million homes by December of this year, using HFC. The NBN now forecasts that only 10,000 homes will be connected by June of this year and only 875,000 by June of next year. So we've got a bunch of different reports here, written by the Prime Minister's mates and former advisers, that are full of mistakes and wrong assumptions. And this bill that we're now debating implements their recommendations. Many of those recommendations attempt to roll back the competition and consumer benefits delivered by the former Labor government in this sector. We do not support this, and nor does most of the telco industry. Let's start with Part 3, which proposes to relax the non-discrimination obligations on NBNCo in relation to pilots or trials. The non-discrimination provisions prohibit NBN corporations from discriminating between access seekers in the supply of services. They are an important part of the level playing field introduced by Labor's NBN reforms. And industry agrees. Optus calls the principle of non-discrimination an important foundation principle in their submission to the Environment and Comms Legislation Committee that reviewed this bill. Macquarie Telecom, in its submission, called these obligations absolutely fundamental and non-negotiable. The Competitive Carriers Coalition called them a core element in restraining market power which should not be changed. It's unclear why the government wants to relax these provisions. Worse, the risks posed by relaxing non-discrimination provisions far outweigh any imagined benefits. As the Competitive Carriers Coalition puts it in their submission, and I quote, "The proposal to dilute the non-discrimination requirements in order to allow NBN to do exclusive deals for pilots and trials is highly risky, unnecessary and supported by no persuasive evidence that there is a problem in existing rules." If you want to understand just how unfriendly the government's proposed changes are to consumers, look no further than at the submission by ACAN, which says that these proposed amendments are, quote, "do not appear to add any benefit to consumers," and, quote, "may result in anti-competitive behaviour in the industry," end of quote. So this is a solution in search of a problem. The government hasn't done its homework here. They haven't spoken to the telco industry. They haven't spoken, or if they have, they haven't listened to them, and they haven't spoken to ACAN and consumer groups here. because what is obvious from the submissions that the Senate committee has received is that there is enormous opposition to them. That's just one example in the bill. That's part 3. Parts 4 and 5 of this bill add to the matters the ACCC is required to consider when making access determinations and restrict the ACCC's decision-making powers in relation to special access undertakings. The effect of these measures will be to add complexity and delay to the ACCC's decision-making processes to the detriment of consumers. Once again, we are faced with proposed changes which are intended to roll back Labor's consumer-friendly reforms and replace them with unnecessary red tape that will benefit incumbents at the expense of competition. Not surprisingly, a lot of telecommunications providers are also opposed to these provisions. Optus notes in relation to the Part 4 changes that, quote, "It is possible to envisage circumstances in which these provisions interfere with or constrain the decision-making of the ACCC to the detriment of consumers," end of quote. ACAN is also concerned about this. It says in its submission that Part 4 and 5, quote, "appear to restrict the ACCC's ability to make markets work for consumers." ACAN also noted that, quote, "it was not convinced that the problems triggering these proposed amendments currently or in the future exist. The amendments are likely to add further complexity to the telecommunications regime and increase the amount of time it takes for the regulator to arrive at and implement decisions," end of quote. So once again, this looks like a solution in search of a problem. Once again, the government hasn't done its homework, hasn't satisfactorily consulted with industry or consumer groups to address their concerns. Part 7 of this bill is one of those rare creatures that is completely friendless. Everyone is opposed to this, and it's not difficult to see why. In its submission, Telstra nailed the government's motive for these provisions when it said, and I quote, "NBN Co's latest corporate plan suggests that there will be a larger than anticipated funding gap between the build costs and the capped funding commitment by the government." And I couldn't agree more. Remember, when Malcolm Turnbull, the now Prime Minister, first announced his second-rate NBN, he said that it would cost $29.5 billion in required funding and it would be funded entirely out of public equity. In December of 2013, when he revealed his first $11 billion blowout from $29.5 billion to $41 billion, he said that that extra $11 billion would be funded out of private debt. In August of last year, when he admitted to the latest blowout, a $26.5 billion blowout, he said that potentially that $26.5 billion would be sourced from private debt markets, potentially sourced from private debt markets. So Telstra's right to point out this massive cost blowout and to be concerned about whether the government is trying to use this bill to stem this hemorrhaging by giving NBN the power to enter into other markets. Part 7 proposes an open-ended power which allows the government to bypass the line of business restrictions set out in the NBN Companies Act. The opposition will not support this open-ended power. The NBN is signature Labor policy that was designed to upgrade Australia's communications network for the 21st century and fix decades of failure in the wholesale monopoly that is Australia's fixed-line access network. The government has not made a case to extend NBN's remit beyond the access network. It's unclear what the government is proposing to achieve with these proposed reforms. But one thing is clear. The entire telco industry does not support this, and neither do we. Part 7 also attempts to reflect in legislation the government's policy of axing universal national wholesale pricing and replacing it with wholesale price caps. Deputy Speaker, universal national wholesale pricing is a reform that we introduced and that we're particularly proud of. It means that Australians living in regional and rural Australia pay the same wholesale price for equivalent services as people in our big cities. The Vertigan panel recommended getting rid of universal national wholesale pricing, and it's now clear that the Liberal Party is moving to axe these important reforms. Once again, the perennially impotent National Party is doing nothing to stand up for Australians living in the bush. But Labor won't stand for it, and we won't support these changes either. All of what I have just said, Deputy Speaker, is set out in the Opposition's dissenting report of the Senate Environment and Communications Legislation Committee investigation of this bill. We said in that report that we do not support parts 3, 4, 5, 7 and 8 of this bill because these measures are unnecessary, retrograde and add complexity to regulatory decision-making processes. But worse than that, many of the proposed measures compromise fundamental elements of the level playing field underpinning the NBN and may have a detrimental impact on competition and consumer outcomes. We also said in that dissenting report that parts 1, 2 and 6 of this bill are non-contentious and that the government has the option of splitting those measures out of this bill and introducing them separately if it wants them passed. Interestingly, Deputy Speaker, at 5:30 p.m. on Friday night, my office got an email from the Minister for Communications office advising that they had drafted a number of amendments to this bill and were removing parts 3, 4, 5, 7 and 8. What a humiliating backdown. After 2.5 years of report after report that cost millions and millions of dollars, the government is now saying they're not going to go ahead with these recommendations. What a mess. But at least they are doing this now. Better late than never. So I look forward to the government moving these amendments in consideration in detail. I look forward to watching the government gut this bill like a fish when we get there. I also flag that we'll move our own amendments to this bill in the Senate. This project, under Malcolm Turnbull's watch, has become an absolute mess, and the story in today's Sydney Morning Herald is just the latest example of that. Today it's been revealed in leaked documents from NBN Co that Malcolm Turnbull's second-rate copper NBN is hopelessly delayed and over budget. These documents reveal that NBN Co has met less than a third of its internal rollout target for Malcolm Turnbull's second-rate copper NBN. The delays are due mostly to problems with connecting mains power to the Prime Minister's street-side copper cabinets. And these are problems that are all of this Prime Minister's making. Fibre to the premises is a passive network that doesn't require mains power. These leaked documents also reveal that Malcolm Turnbull's copper NBN is coming in over budget, despite NBN Co's recent assurances that cost was tracking as expected in NBN Co's corporate plan 2016-15. Malcolm Turnbull's chickens are finally coming home to roost. He promised in 2013 that his second-rate copper NBN would be rolling out at scale by mid-2014, that fibre to the node would be rolling out at scale by the middle of 2014. Well, it's now the middle of 2016 and it's still not being rolled out at scale. As these leaked documents today reveal, NBN Co has only completed 29,000 homes under its own steam and 65,000 homes, that's 65,000 homes short of their internal target. So the cost of Malcolm Turnbull's second-rate NBN has doubled. The time it's going to take to build this second-rate NBN has more than doubled. The cost of this second-rate fibre to the node technology has tripled. The cost of fixing up Telstra's old copper network to make this work has blown out by 1,000%. In places across the country where they're switching it on, it's not working properly, and some people are getting slower speeds with the NBN, with the copper NBN, than they were getting under ADSL. And now this. What a mess. What a mess. It is a complete failure. And the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald could not have said it better. Turnbull's NBN plan in crisis.
I thank the member for Blaxland. The question is, the bill be now read a second time. To call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Second Deputy Speaker. Interesting to hear from the member for Blaxland, who gets a bit touchy on these sorts of subjects when there's nobody in the chamber. But I just don't know why he doesn't ask questions, and certainly didn't ask too many questions of Malcolm Turnbull, the member for Wentworth, when he was the Communications Minister. That's Malcolm, not Jason. Let's hope that doesn't happen too soon. But certainly didn't ask too many questions about NBN or telecommunications or indeed mobile black spots when he had the opportunity to. Still doesn't ask too many questions when the chamber is full. So I put it to him to ask a few questions about NBN in the chamber during question time. Be big, be brave, be bold, and ask a few questions in question time of the Prime Minister, of the Communications Minister, or the representative of the Communications Minister, appreciating the fact that Senator Mitch Fifield is in the other chamber, he's in the other place. But you know, it's all easy to come in here when the chamber's mostly empty and to make big and loud statements about the NBN and about our policy. And I have to say that much of which he said is inaccurate at any rate. He talked about a solution in search of a problem. Well, we know on this side of the House that technology and connectivity is at the heart of what we want to encourage as a government. And that's important because it's all about what we're doing as a government. The Turnbull government has an agenda of innovation, of agility, of productivity. And we on this side understand the importance of communications infrastructure when it comes to providing just that, in making this plan a reality. We want to encourage more people to live, to work, to invest in rural and regional communities, and we understand that a reliable and affordable communication system is crucial to ensuring our rural and remote regional communities are part of our ideas boom. And as local members moving throughout the many towns and communities of our electorates, people will often raise with us the issues they face and that they want the government, the federal government, to help them with. And for my large rural electorate of Riverina, roughly the same size as the state of Tasmania, as with many of my colleagues in similar communities and indeed some of even those opposite, the member for Lingiari, for instance, the member for Throsby, I appreciate that they represent regional communities. There are a few issues raised with me more frequently than others when it comes to communications and mobile black spots. Second Deputy Speaker, member for McEwen, I've heard you raise this in this chamber, are the bane of many country communities and are a significant impediment to safety, to productivity, to connectivity for people who choose to live and to do business in the communities we serve. The Nationals get it. They do. We live in these communities too. We understand, as do our constituents, the frustration, the concern when the telephone simply won't connect or a phone call is scratchy, and the potential that this reality has for instances of natural or medical emergency, and indeed other times when you simply need a phone, just for convenience. I'm proud to be part of a government which not only acknowledges what a problem this is, but is actually doing something to fix it. Now, under Labor, not a dollar was spent on mobile black spots, but we are indeed getting on with the job of fixing that problem. Our promise to establish the mobile black spots program was, for me, a real highlight of the last election. Thanks to the hard work for the member for Cowper as Shadow Minister, we were able to say to the people who live with challenging mobile service that we were going to do something about it. And it is all about connectivity. NBN is one thing, and I understand. The member for Throsby spoke a minute ago, you're going to talk about the legislation. Well, I understand the importance of the NBN, but I also understand the importance of total connectivity. In the 6 years that those opposite were in government, we heard a lot about communications. We saw much of ministers in high-vis talking about how the Labor Party backed better communications. Kevin Rudd's rushed NBN plan was going to bring rivers of gold to communities without any regard for its cost or the time the network would actually take to build. And we saw, indeed, in my home city of Wagga Wagga, lots of holes being dug and tape with some iron posts and around little spots that the NBN was apparently coming to, but it was just a photo op and a hard hat, and that was Labor's plan. There was never actually any fibre rolled out. There was never actually any fibre pulled through. those holes and those channels that were being dug. More importantly, in that whole time those opposite were in government, there was not a word breathed about mobile black spots, and moreover, not a cent spent on it. Nothing about the safety concerns, nothing about how a farmer or primary producer should be able to do business from their farm, nothing about how school students in remote locations should be able to do their homework and connect with their friends online. Just photo ops. And in not just with communications, but in so many other aspects of government, it was government by press release, government by media opportunity. I'm proud that the Riverina has received significant investment from this coalition government as part of the first round of the Mobile Black Spot program. And thanks to the hard work of the member for Bradfield, the former Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Communications, and now Senator Fiona Nash, National Party Senator for New South Wales, as the dedicated Minister for Regional Communications, we are actually investing in communities. We are actually building towers. I drove down the Sturt Highway yesterday on my way to Darlington Point to open new exhibits at the Altina Wildlife Park. I just thought I'd throw a plug in there because it's a great tourist draw card. And I drove past Colin Gully, and there it was, that tower, that wonderful communications tower, brought to you by this government. We are actually connecting communities to the mobile services that they deserve, and yet not a peep from those opposite when they were in government. I was able to announce last year that thanks to the first round of the Mobile Black Spot program and co-investment from both Telstra and Vodafone, that 7 base stations would be built in the Riverina electorate. Telstra is investing in building base stations at Ladysmith, Manus and Merriwagga, whilst Vodafone's construction will take place along the Mid-Western Highway, as well as at Tabata, where there's an important feedlot. Ungary, great football club celebrating its centenary this year, and at Weethally, where they'd had problems for years. In all, this $4.75 million investment, I wish it was more, Second Deputy Speaker, I will admit, I wish it was more, but $1.59 million of which is coming from this coalition government, will provide a service to more than 40 unique communities, they are unique communities, and locations, including critical road and highway intersections. I've always said that the $100 million could be spent in the Riverina electorate alone. And I'm sure that my rural colleagues would agree with me on that point, the fact that $100 million probably still wouldn't get full mobile coverage of the Riverina, which stretches from Mount Kosciuszko, as the former Minister Simon Crean used to talk about, the high point of Australian politics. I'll agree with him, even though it's going to be in Eden Monero after the latest Australian Electoral Commission redistribution of boundaries. But from Kosci right out to the red soil plains of Hillston and beyond, very different geography, snowy mountains to plains. The $100 million could be spent in the Riverina, and you probably still wouldn't get total coverage, but it is a good start, and it's $100 million more than what those opposite were going to provide. And the Nationals were very much heart and soul behind getting this money, because the Nationals, we get it, we understand, we care. We want to play a role in getting communities the connection they deserve to a reliable mobile service, as well as better and more affordable NBN. I'm also pleased that there is an additional round of the Mobile Black Spot program. It's important, and we will help those communities which were not funded in the first round to put their case as part of a competitive tender selection process once more. I'm proud that what this government has achieved thus far, and I know that those in communities which need better mobile service appreciate what we are doing, because they tell me so. There's still more work to do. I went to a number of functions on the weekend, and people were talking about the good job that our government is doing as far as creating jobs and prosperity, and they want us to continue. They don't want to go down the Labor experiment again. There are still communities which need better services, and I'll continue to work with the new minister, Senator Nash, who knows the Riverina electorate well, and the telecommunications companies to keep this issue front and centre of the government's agenda. We're also a government which understands the importance of using taxpayers' money as efficiently as possible. We understand that Australian taxpayers work hard and expect governments of all persuasions, whether they're Labor, whether they're coalition, to use the money that they pay in tax in a measured, in a responsible way, fiscally responsible. That's what taxpayers want. And for this reason, upon coming to government in September 2013, the then Communications Minister, now Prime Minister, wanted to ensure that the rollout of the national broadband network was one which was a fast, efficient and also cost-effective, as much as humanly possible. That review found that a multi-technology mix was the best way to future-proof the NBN for delivering universal access to fast broadband. Now, I know that the Australian Labor Party member from the Griffith branch, Peter Knox, always writes letters to the editor, and he always says that McCormack was out there and he said that for Griffith NBN wasn't that important. But I didn't say that. What I actually said, and I want to correct the record because it's true, is that I do receive far more complaints about mobile service than I do about broadband. That said, NBN is important. That said, the coalition government needs to ensure that we get NBN rolled out as soon as we can, and we're doing it. The NBN is on track to meet its targets for the year within the budget set out in the company's corporate plan. Any suggestions to the contrary is just plain wrong. The company has met its targets for the past 6 quarters, and that's good. This is in stark contrast to the management under the ALP, when the company met only 15% of its forecast rollout. The government has taken a business-like approach. You know why we've taken a business-like approach? That's because on this side we actually understand business. On that side, they're just, I guess, led by the nose unfortunately, by the unions. And not too many of them actually understand business. After 2 terms of government, Labor had upgraded the broadband of 1 in 50 premises. By this financial year, the NBN will have upgraded 1 in 4 premises. 1 in 50, 1 in 4. You do the math, Second Deputy Speaker, it's pretty obvious. And by June 2018, it will have upgraded 3 in 4 premises. 3 in 4. Our changes to the rollout will see the project finished 6 to 8 years sooner. 6 to 8 years sooner, Second Deputy Speaker, and at around $30 billion less cost. $30 billion less cost. Nothing to sneeze at there. Now, a multi-technology mix is a central tenet of our promise to deliver faster broadband to Australians sooner and at less cost to the taxpayer. This legislation seeks, in part, to implement the government's response to the independent cost-benefit analysis delivered to government in December 2014. Cost-benefit analysis, to those opposite, is something where you have to weigh up how much something is going to deliver as far as productivity is concerned, how much it's going to benefit, what it's going to do for the taxpayers as far as value for money. I just say that because there weren't too many things under Labor's watch that were ever cost-benefit analysis efficient. Now, we want to ensure, this coalition government wants to ensure that the NBN is delivered in a way which is a competitive regulatory framework, provide greater certainty for industry and be an innovative, efficient and effective service delivery, provide that for customers, for consumers. This bill is a measured approach to the government's rollout agenda. Upon coming to government, we wanted to take stock of where Labor's network was up to, I can say that was a mess, and ensure that the customer is getting the best benefit for their dollar. We know that those opposite use the NBN rollout as a political pawn, as a plaything for glossy brochures, photo opportunities and promises which were, quite frankly, undeliverable in the time frame that the ALP set out. We're taking a different approach. We're taking a measured, a business-like approach to the NBN rollout. As I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure it's faster, available sooner and at less cost to the taxpayer. This bill is a critical component of this agenda. It will better coordinate interactions between the facilities access regime in the first schedule of the Telecommunications Act 1997 and the access regime in the part of the Competition and Consumer Act of 2010, a relevant part of that Act, making it clear that the latter regime ought to take precedence in the regulation of access to facilities. This is part of the coalition's endeavour, to provide greater certainty and clarity in the communications industry. In the Riverina, the NBN rollout is well underway. In Wagga Wagga, my electorate's biggest city, around 17,600 homes and businesses are expected to receive an NBN service either through a fibre to the node or fibre to the premises model under the NBN's 3-year construction cycle. That is good for productivity for one of Australia's best electorates as far as productivity is concerned. I commend the bill to the House.
Thank the member for Riverina. The question is the bill we now read a second time, and I call the member for Throsby.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Pleased to be speaking on a bill about the NBN, and I will speak about the NBN, unlike the member for the Riverina. It matters. It matters to us who live in regional Australia. If you don't live in one of the major metropolitan centres, you rely on fast, reliable, affordable broadband. Has to be ubiquitous, and it has to touch regional Australia. Because in regional Australia, you're more likely to have people operating home-based businesses who are relying on broadband. You're more likely to have businesses which are relying on the internet to market their good, to purchase their raw materials or their inputs. You're more likely to have kids who are relying on broadband services to deliver education, of course, entertainment, but also, and it can't be discounted, the importance of having broadband to stay connected with kids who may have moved to town to go to university or to go to school, or may have moved to another city around the world. So it matters a lot to people in regional Australia. That's why it's so disappointing for Labor MPs to see this bill, as it makes its sorry pass from the Senate down to the House of Representatives, because it really is another sorry step in the saga of the government's mishandling of the national broadband network. And Deputy Speaker, when the member for Wentworth mishandled the whole Goodwin-Gretsch affair, all he did was trash his own reputation. But in mishandling the rollout of the national broadband network, what he is doing is trashing the communications future of the entire country. And for that, he must be held account. The original bill, the original plan for this bill, as the member for Blackstone has pointed out, was based on the Vertigan Committee's report. It has been amended in the other place after it was introduced, only at the last minute. And its original plan was to remove wholesale price requirement, which was put there by a Labor government, I must say, at the lobbying of the member for New England, the former member for New England, Tony Windsor, who was very hot on this point, Deputy Speaker, because he could understand, also being a member from a regional electorate, the importance of ensuring that we have uniform wholesale pricing so that people who are living in regional Australia aren't paying exponentially more for their broadband services than the people who are living in the big cities. Axing this reform will mean that Australians living in the bush will pay more for those essential services, their essential communication services, than their brothers and sisters in the big cities. Deputy Speaker, I can understand how a proposition such as this would get through the Liberal Party caucus. I can understand that because they have little interest and not much knowledge about the needs of people in regional Australia. I can understand how the member for Wentworth, with some of the finest broadband in the country, would think that this was a good idea because he doesn't know what it's like to live in regional or rural Australia, Deputy Speaker. I can even understand how it got through some of the members of the Senate, Deputy Speaker. But what I can't understand is this. How did it get through a cabinet which now has a National Party deputy leader who has specific portfolio responsibility for regional broadband? I can't understand that, Deputy Speaker, unless she was asleep at the wheel. Not for the first time. Not for the first time, Deputy Speaker, because this is the same the same minister responsible for regional health who let proposals through the cabinet, through the ministry, through their caucus and potentially through their parliament, were we not standing up, which would have introduced co-payments, the GP tax, Deputy Speaker, which would have had a devastating impact on members living in rural and regional Australia. So I can understand how it got through the Liberal Party room. What I can't understand, Deputy Speaker, is how it got through the joint party room made up of National Party members, and why the National Party members in the other place all stuck their hand up for it. That I cannot understand, Deputy Speaker. Why these people, and like the member for Riverina, who just stood there for nigh on 15 minutes talking about how committed he was to broadband in rural and regional Australia. He stuck his hand up in the ministry meeting, voting for the abolition of universal wholesale pricing, Deputy Speaker, and his colleagues in the other place stuck their hand up, voting for the abolition of a provision which was protecting constituents in rural and regional Australia. I cannot understand it for the life of me, except to say that they are obviously once again asleep at the wheel. Now, the member for Blaxland has drawn the House's attention to an article that appeared in this morning's Sydney Morning Herald, Deputy Speaker, and you're from Victoria, I'm from New South Wales, so I probably read the Sydney Morning Herald more than you, and I don't think it'd surprise. It's no secret to anyone in this place that the Sydney Morning Herald has been a champion for the now Prime Minister, the member for Wentworth, in his rise to the top job in knocking off the member for Warringah to become the Prime Minister of this country. But I've got to say, they are particularly critical of his mishandling of the communications portfolio in this story today, which talks about Turnbull's NBN plan in absolute crisis. Well, it is in absolute crisis, Deputy Speaker, and were it up to those on the other side who are completely opposed, and they will oppose the amendments that are going to be moved by the member for Blaxland to provide more transparency to the operations of the NBN. They will oppose those, and they are opposed to the provision of information such as has been leaked to Sydney Morning Herald journalists yesterday, Deputy Speaker. When we look at the Prime Minister, when he was responsible directly for the NBN, we see nothing but bungling and political statements masquerading as a policy, Deputy Speaker, and it's all starting to unravel. It's all starting to unravel now. We were told that under Malcolm Turnbull's direction, the member for Wentworth, the Prime Minister's direction, the national broadband, their second-rate national broadband network could be delivered for just under $30 billion. This is swiftly changing, Deputy Speaker. We were told in December 2013 that there'd be an $11 billion blowout. An $11 billion blowout. Well, it gets worse from there. In August last year, just before he bailed as the Communications Minister, we were told that it was going to blow out by over $26 million, Deputy Speaker. Labor has seen these massive cost blowouts being announced again and again and again. But what we haven't seen, Deputy Speaker, is them sticking to the rollout deadlines that they promise. What we are seeing from the Prime Minister, the Minister who is formally responsible for communications, is cost blowouts and further delays. We've seen through the internal progress report that they have fallen, Deputy Speaker, even further behind in the rollout of the national broadband network. They were promising it that it was going to be done quicker and better and cheaper. Slower, worse and more expensive is what we are getting. Deputy Speaker, by the company's own assessment, the giant infrastructure project has fallen 2/3 short of its benchmark construction timetable. Connection costs to each house or business are also blowing out. The final design process for connections needed before construction can start is running even further and further and further behind. Deputy Speaker, 1.4 million households were to have been approved at the date of the report. The figure is sitting at less than half of that, Deputy Speaker. Less than 660,000 households have been connected, Deputy Speaker. 1.4 million promises to be approved, 660,000 of them have actually been approved. The report, which was never intended for public consumption, has disclosed that there is more, that the Deputy Speaker, that the project is drifting. It is drifting, the cost blowouts are increasing, the rollout schedule is in further delay, Deputy Speaker, and what we know is this is entirely the fault of the Prime Minister and the coalition parties. Their supposed fibre to the node was going to be the quick fix. Not as good as Labor's program. The quick and dirty will get it to you. It won't be as good, but it'll be just what you need, Deputy Speaker. But what we are finding is that the technology mix that is required for this second-rate NBN is a part of the factor which is causing delay. Because as the member for Blaxland has told out, when you run an NBN program, a broadband program based on a fibre to the node program, as opposed to the passive wiring system which takes the fibre optic cable, delivering super-fast broadband all the way to the household, Deputy Speaker, when you stop it at the node and try to connect the copper to the node, you need a power source, a battery source at each and every one of those nodes. And this is indeed a part of the delay which is being visited upon households right around the country, including, Deputy Speaker, in my own electorate. Deputy Speaker. And what frustrates people in my electorate is that we have got parts of the electorate which are getting fibre to the household and parts of the electorate which are getting fibre to the node. And, Deputy Speaker, in some of the suburbs, quite densely populated suburbs, Deputy Speaker, they can literally throw a tennis ball across the backyard onto the roof of the person who's getting fibre to the household and very happy with it, whilst they are still struggling, unable to get a port for an ADSL connection, Deputy Speaker. These are the circumstances that are being faced by people in rural and regional Australia today. The member for Wentworth, with some of the finest broadband connectivity in the country, is blind to this because he just doesn't get regional Australia. I'd expect the National Party to be jumping up and down about it, but they don't, because they seem to be choking under the bridle of their Liberal Party masters. But we know in electorates like mine it really does matter. I conducted an extensive survey, Deputy Speaker, of over 1,025 households and businesses in my electorate, and the response that I got from them was shocking, was absolutely shocking. We had people who are running small businesses or home-based businesses who are saying they had to move house. They had to move from where they were currently living to another region because they could not get fast, reliable broadband, Deputy Speaker. And when your business is relying on broadband, this is not an optional extra, this is absolutely critical. We had people like Sarah from Oak Flats who wrote to me and told me this: we run 2 home businesses and it interferes greatly with our income. We're experiencing frequent dropouts. No national broadband network here. Paul from Albion Park Rail told me, I run a small business from home. I'm considering a move to where the NBN is connected just so that I can work at a decent speed. Now, there may be parts of Australia, Deputy Speaker, where people would look at this and say, well, no worries, Deputy Speaker, but when you live in a region where unemployment is stubbornly 2% above the national average, every small business that moves from your region, every job that is lost from your region matters critically, Deputy Speaker, and that's what the member for Wentworth and that's what the Nationals and that's what this Liberal Party government just do not understand. Shannon from Mittagong has told me that the internet is affecting his productivity, meaning that he spends more time commuting to and from work instead of working from home when he can. He says, and I quote, "We cannot obtain a fast internet connection. I work from home and commute to Sydney and require fast speeds to work." Deputy Speaker, there are over 12,000 people who are in the same position as Shannon from Mittagong. There's 12,000 people who weekly make the trip from my electorate to Sydney to find employment or to work because the jobs just aren't there in regional Australia. The broadband network is going to make an enormous difference to their lives, but it's being delayed, it's costing more, and it's going to be half as good under this Liberal government because they just don't get the needs of regional Australia, Deputy Speaker. So as I said earlier, this is not an academic issue. This is not an issue of politics posturing as policy, Deputy Speaker. This is an issue which is making a difference to people in my electorate on a daily basis. As I said at the outset, when the Prime Minister, when the member for Wentworth mishandled the Godwin-Gretsch affair, all he did was trash his own reputation. All he did was trash his own reputation. But in mishandling the rollout of the national broadband network, he is trashing the future of the communication systems in this country, and that's simply not good enough.
Thank the member for Throsby. The question is the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Grey.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm moved by the comments from the member of Throsby. One would think he is living in a parallel universe out there somewhere, where he somehow reached the conclusion that if Labor had somehow survived the last election, all of the problems of NBN in Australia would be solved, that in fact everybody in Australia would be wired up fibre to the premises, when in fact we know it would have been another 10 years at least, Mr Deputy Speaker, before the NBN network reached to that far. So to nitpick around the edges, when in fact I can report from South Australia at the time of the last election that the company that was engaged to conduct the rollout had collapsed, as had the same provider in Western Australia. We did not have any action happening on the ground because it had collapsed. Now that was the story of the whole NBN under Labor, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I just can't stand here and not respond to those misleading comments from the member for Throsby. So, of course, telecommunications is one of the fastest moving technologies in the world, Mr Deputy Speaker, and that is why any platform that is designed needs to be flexible, fast moving and allow businesses in Australia to do the same. That's why the government asked for a report from the Vertigan panel to suggest changes to legislation that will enable for sensible and flexible use of the NBN platform as it is unrolled around Australia. This legislation addresses some of the issues the Vertigan panel reported on. It allows for the NBN network, for instance, for users of the NBN network to use in-building cabling that already exists, and that makes sense, Mr Deputy Speaker. We don't want to rebuild the universe. We want to use the infrastructure that is there and makes sense, and that will be provided for. It also allows for flexibility in conducting pilots and trials. It allows companies to have some protection on their IP as they try and investigate new ways of using the NBN platform. In essence, this is good legislation that allows for the proper use of the NBN role of the new NBN platform. But of course, it is also an opportunity to talk about exactly what's happening in the electorate of Grey and how this rollout is being received. And I'm very pleased, in fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, to report that it really is picking up a lot of speed and we're getting a lot of interest, and people are very excited when they sign on to the new networks. Now, of course, Grey is one of those electorates in Australia that is least well served by the old systems, if you like. Quite a number of my electors, I think, in fact, we're down to about 900 now, but there were many more at one stage on the satellite systems, which became overloaded. I won't go into the detail of why that was, but once again, that was mishandling by the previous minister, Senator Conroy, where just too many places were allocated under the available space for the satellites. I was one of those users, in fact, Mr Deputy Speaker. It got to the point of being pretty much unusable. I managed to, for my own usage, to put up a 40-foot antenna on top of my house to receive mobile phone signal, which has been used as a platform through a smart aerial within my premises to run my internet access. It's not perfect, but it should get me through to the opening up of the NBN satellite. And I often say of the satellite, Mr Deputy Speaker, that perhaps this was one area, or maybe even the only area, that the previous Minister, Senator Conroy, got right in this rollout of the NBN platform, was to commission 2 new state-of-the-art satellites. They are the best in the world. They are the newest, and one is in orbit now and being tested for use in Melbourne, I understand, and we would expect that to start taking on customers around the end of April. There's been a lot of scuttlebutt out there, Mr Deputy Speaker, from pseudo experts talking about how inadequate the satellite service will be. This is exactly the same satellite service that the Labor government